Alright, you guys, it's here. I knew at some point in this offseason I was going to do an Andy Murray tribute. Long overdue, so I said I might as well make it the first thing to kick off my offseason content. 2024, so a lot of tennis royalty, call it a career. Andy Murray, of course, one of them. Adding a couple more fireworks at the buzzer in his last tournament at the Olympics in the doubles with Devo, saving all those match points, those two matches coming back from the brink. But I needed more time than I had during the Paris Olympics to make something more thorough for Andy, and here it is. So I'm going to do this video the same way I did Roger Federer's, listing off 5 of my favorite Andy Murray moments that I think best encapsulate his career. But before that, I would just like to say, especially considering I made this channel well after Andy Murray, ceased to be the best version of Andy Murray. And I do feel like in the Metal Hip Murray era, he became such a sympathetic figure. Not many people remember that prior to that. I do feel like, discourse around him was so split where, a lot of people did not like Andy Murray. A lot of people found, the constant barking on court to the box, his early on woes in big matches, and, just the fact that his game, a lot of people found it boring. And so I always had a soft spot for Andy Murray, just sheerly out of the fact that I thought he deserved better. I have always referred to him as the mortal among gods. And, I always found the arc really, really endearing of his because from the onset, pretty much, his infancy as a tennis player, he was just pitted up against this three-headed monster. And quite frankly, he was just going to have to deal with getting over the hump against players that were flat out just better than him. The 3 greatest players of all time. And we all love that tattoo Stan got, right as he transformed into the best version of himself. The ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. That's exactly what Andy Murray actually lived. For a guy that lost his first 4 major finals, had the hopes of an entire nation on his back, he was knocked over so many times and had to get up also as a result so many times. And that's the thing, obviously, with his career, is it requires so much context where his numbers, obviously they're kind of weighed down a little bit by the last couple of years post the hip surgery. But even before that, because the time he played in never will do him justice. But in spite of that, the things that he accomplished within that, peakiest of peak tennis eras, the accolades are all that more spectacular. I mean, here's a guy that pretty much in every single statistical category, minus slams won, is an all-time great, is a legend. And that, of course, can be marked up, again, to sharing this space along with the big 3. And, it's not just in the numbers, you look at Andy Murray, watched him play, evaluated him as a talent. It's as good as, one of those mere mortals can get, because it's pretty much a diet big 3, which is something that nobody else can say during that time. He basically does every single facet of tennis at an excellent level, except in Murray's case, the second serve and, the forehand could get a little bit passive. And even the forehand, got to a place at a certain point where it was really, really good. So I can't even pin that down to like a talent technique thing. I don't know whether it's that, a combination of that, and, mentality thing of why it could be passive. But nonetheless, he just checks so many boxes at such an elite level. Great feel with the dropper, the volleys, one of the greatest defenders and movers the sport has ever seen. All-time great returner as well. Obviously, a dogged mentality, whether that was, coming back from the brink in so many matches. Always a flair for the dramatic, even in his best years. Always seeming to take the path of greatest resistance, making his victories all that more sweet. But also, being so resilient, having to come back from so many stinging defeats, the resilience always there, brought out probably to even a greater degree once he was a much reduced version of himself after the hip resurfacing surgery. And yeah, in assessing Andy Murray, that's the last thing I want to leave with, is that I think it's super underrated how much Andy Murray loved the game, because a lot of these legends in any sport you see, they stick around until the wheels fall off and play until they can't anymore. Andy Murray, he got to that point and kept playing for basically, 7-8 years. At the very least, 5-6 years, and his statistics, as I alluded to, took a hit. He had to know for a while that he would never return to being the same player after the hip injury. But he still stuck around so long, tried so many different things, experimenting even then with different voices in his box. At the end this year, different racket. The love of the game cliche is thrown around all the time, but, with Andy Murray, I really do think he's very unique in that respect, where, the love for the game really did drive him way beyond the point at which it seemed fate had determined it would be curtains on his career. This game pretty much had to be pried away from him, and obviously he couldn't stay away for long. He's right back in the mix in a different role now. But with that, that's pretty much my ode to Andy Murray, the player, and, the fruitful, prosperous career he enjoyed. Here are my favorite Andy Murray moments. And coming in at the 5th position, I go Davis Cup 2015 for Andy Murray. Everybody knows the match point, one of the great match points in tennis history, that clinched the Davis Cup, the lob over Goffin after a long side-to-side rally. And everybody knows the long-awaited drought that Andy Murray snapped winning Wimbledon for the first time. But in 2015, he actually also snapped a longer drought with Great Britain, and the last time they had won Davis Cup, it was actually 2 years longer than the Wimbledon drought. I believe 79 years separating the last time they had won Davis Cup. And yeah, both singles, doubles, Andy Murray really had his fingerprints all over this Great Britain win. A combined 11-0 in singles and doubles. I believe 3 of those matches were doubles matches, with him playing the dubs from the quarters to the final. Of course, alongside his brother Jamie Murray. And yeah, Andy's super workmanlike throughout the course of this winning run. Did it with a revolving door at second singles of Dan Evans, Kyle Edmund, a 20-year-old Kyle Edmund at the time, and James Ward. So obviously, it was imperative, all the more pressure on him to perform in singles and really save a close shave with Gilles Simon, where he had to rally from a set down in the quarterfinals. He was mostly clinical, didn't even come close to losing, and obviously finished with a flourish. The lasting image pretty much from Davis Cup 2015 will always be that running backhand lob by Andy Murray, pretty much placed on a dime. Really none of the typical Andy Murray down-to-the-wire dramatics. You can't tell the story of Andy Murray's career without this Davis Cup 2015 run. One of actually many standout international performances representing Great Britain. Number 4, I'm going to go with my highlights from Metal Hip Murray. I really do think one of the great tennis documentaries and tennis-related media that's ever been put out was Andy Murray's resurfacing documentary. For one, getting all that good insight into how he is, behind the scenes. And then primarily, getting to see just how much pain he was in. I remember watching Washington, D.C. 2018, and, when he was crying after that well past midnight finish against Marius Copil, I think all of us, commentary included, were like, look how much this guy cares, look how much this guy loves this sport. But in that doc, Andy really pulled back the curtain that he was crying because he was in that much pain, and that, it hurt him that much that, the way he felt that night at the end of that match is like, I'm not going to be able to play anymore. And it was that realization that drove him to tears after that match. And watching that documentary, you really grasp just how hell or high water it was for Andy to be back out there on the tennis court. I actually was in attendance for his first match with the metal hip in Cincinnati against Richard Gasquet. And it's been 5 years now, but how crazy is it that at the beginning of the year in Australia, you saw that video tribute, all his peers paying respects to his career, and that seeming to be the curtain call on his career. The fact that 9 months later he was even still an active player, let alone winning a title in Antwerp, I think we grasped the importance back then, and, I remember it was hysteria, it was crazy, the discourse around what Murray did that week, but, 5 years later, I do kind of think we've forgotten about this one, no less doing it, beating Stan Wawrinka, who had just made quarterfinals at Roland Garros and the US Open, playing really damn well, and Andy battled back from a set and a breakdown in the third as well. I think that moment alone made it all worth it to try coming back, and there's really nothing else to prove from that point on. It is as great a 250 win as there's ever been. It's one of the great wins, I think, in Andy Murray's career, which is obviously saying something. And then, fast forward to last year, there aren't many runs to the third round of a major that you can call epic, electric, one of the headline stories of that entire major. But Andy Murray's run in 2023 at the Australian Open, truly something special. Round 1, heavy underdog against Matteo Berrettini, 1-5 after winning the opening 2 sets. And then, of course, second round against Thanasi Kokkinakis, down 2 sets, 2-0 in the third. No Andy Murray career highlight reel would be complete without this point. Just a scramble for the ages. Throwing up lob after lob, eventually turning the point, getting the error, and you would think that sparked the comeback, but Andy still found himself down 5-3, and Kokkinakis serving for the match. And in this stretch, he really was a cat with 9 lives, You thought he blew his chance against Matteo in the first round after the great start. He found himself match point down in that match, pulled it out. The Kokkinakis match, Thanasi on fire. I think he had over 100 winners in this match. And 35-year-old, going on 36, metal-hipped Andy Murray went on to win the longest match of his career at 5 hours 45 minutes, north of 4 a.m. And obviously from that point, he was running on fumes. Short turnaround, had to play Roberto Bautista Agut. Even there, the set that he stole was something of a Houdini because, he looked dead on his feet, but he still came back, I think 1-3 down in the second and 5-2 in the breaker to steal the second set. He absolutely had the crowd going nuts this entire tournament. And then, followed it up a couple weeks later in Doha, beating Lorenzo Sonego, again saving match point. A win against Alexander Zverev after that, his second over Zverev in the metal hip era. And then another vintage escape against, the up-and-coming Yuri Lehechka, the breakthrough player early in 2023. And, staring down the barrel, 2 match points on his own serve at 3-5 in the third. And then actually 40 love at 5-4. This stretch was absolute madness. He came back, won the match, actually played a fairly competitive final with a red-hot Daniil Medvedev. And obviously Murray never again scaled the heights he did prior to 2017. But these moments, I think, really were cornerstones in how he's remembered today. A lot of people had a more favorable view, warmed up to Andy Murray more in this phase of his career. It was really just awesome to see, that trademark doggedness stick with him. It was the only thing that really carried over from Murray pre-hip injury and post. Most of what made Murray so great before that had already long eroded, but, you would never know it the way that he continued to compete the last 6-7 years of his career. So how do you follow that? Number 3, I'm probably going to go with the moment that is the de facto defining moment for the masses for Andy Murray. Wimbledon 2013. A year ago, seemed like it was a date with destiny for most of the first two sets. From the brink, though, Roger Federer in his garden would tap into the genius and render Andy Murray a spectator for the remainder of the match, ensuring that the long-standing British drought at Wimbledon, going all the way back to 1936, would go on. And as it would turn out, that heartbreaking loss that reduced Murray to tears in the trophy ceremony proved to be the springboard to really give him that championship medal and, work his way to becoming a major champion. More on that later, but obviously a year later, Andy Murray returned a transformed player, major champ. And as was par for the course pretty much every year since 2008 till 2013, there was mass hysteria surrounding Andy Murray, as over the years he continued to advance further and further into the business end of Wimbledon. Pretty much an entire nation's hopes on his shoulders, as British fans and media alike craved the end of their aforementioned 77-year-old British drought on the men's side, and what quickly became a Wimbledon of upsets very early on in 2013. As is tradition with many of Andy Murray's greatest moments, along the way he would find himself on a knife's edge, in danger of not even making it to that eventual glory, where Murray in the quarterfinals here found himself down 2-0 to Fernando Verdasco, and even in the fifth set found himself 6 points from the exit, down serving 3-4 love 30. Of course, he would live to fight another day and would then see off a more spirited challenge than a lot of us remember in Jerzy Janowicz in the semifinals, of course, to set up his date with destiny. And as far as Andy Murray moments go, he doesn't have many that are all that straightforward, so this one, among them, relatively so. And I do say relatively because despite the straight set scoreline, he still had to come back from a breakdown in both sets 2 and 3, I believe. And of course, at the finish line, there was a massive twist. But other than that, this is a pretty flawless performance from Andy Murray. He played a Novak Djokovic. His fuel tank was not full, but, Murray certainly played his part in draining it even further, worked away at the legs, played a lot of great defense to attack in this final. I do remember distinctly feeling like this was as much as I've seen anybody exploit the Djokovic overhead weakness. I've never seen it done so consistently in one match, winning a lot of points from seemingly insurmountable positions. And then, of course, we come to the finish line. It couldn't have been that easy, even though it looked like we wouldn't need much drama. 5-4, 40 love. Novak Djokovic did Novak Djokovic things when he has his back to the wall. Made a really strong last stand, and from there, produced 3 break points. And the tension, I think is as high as anybody could have felt. Any pressure situation you could draw up in tennis, this is right there with anything. I think one of the great, displays of mental toughness, obviously of Murray's career, but probably one of the great displays of mental toughness ever. I mean, all 3 of these break points were well saved by Murray. I mean, he came up with the goods every single time, just played really brave in what is regarded as his career's magnum opus. Not a hint of passivity that, could plague him throughout the entirety of his career. Just 100% conviction in his shots, and of course, when it was finally game, set, match Murray, the wait was well worth it, and Andy Murray became crowned a Wimbledon champion in the most grand fashion possible. And while that will probably forever be his defining hour on a tennis court, there's an ounce of subjectivity here. These are my favorite Andy Murray moments, not his greatest moments in order. And that's why I can say, topping that at number 2, I gotta go with Andy's arc in the summer of 2012. It was just really, really satisfying seeing things come full circle for him in such a short amount of time after being so gutted in the Wimbledon final in 2012, as I said. And you kind of got to take it back to the beginning of this year when Andy first partnered with Ivan Lendl. Obviously never had a year like 2016 winning as much, but personally I take 2012-2013 Murray as the best that he ever played. if you watch his matches from those years, those 2 years feel like the exception, where his forehand really felt like a weapon. I thought Ivan Lendl really had him going after that shot like he never did at any other point in his career, at least for an extended period. He immediately came just short of beating Djokovic in Australia in maybe the pair's best match ever in that semifinal. Despite the final result, had to feel really good about how he played at Wimbledon. But of course, his exploits on center court for 2012 were not yet over. Of course, the London Olympics of 2012 presented a phenomenal opportunity for Murray to finally get over the hump on a big stage. And of course, it is an opportunity he took with both hands. I think probably the best single tournament he has ever played was at these Olympics. Kind of just breezed through just about everybody in his path, not named Marcos Baghdatis, in the round of 16. All tournament long, just a man on a mission. Probably also his best looking outfit ever. And with a chance at revenge on Roger Federer a couple weeks later on center court, Murray would show no mercy to Roger Federer, coming off of the longest best-of-3 match of all time. That being fed to this buzzsaw version of Andy Murray, this gold medal match was never in doubt, as Andy would cruise to his first of 2 singles gold medals, also likely doing his confidence in these big matches a world of good, having beaten Djokovic and Federer in the semis and finals. And then, as the year closed with one more crack to get his first major on the board, like his coach before him, who had lost his first 4 major finals, Murray would follow in Lendl's footsteps, really just scrapping through not just the final, but even the path there was super arduous. I mean, he found himself actually down a set and double break to Marin Cilic in the quarterfinals, had to rally from 5-2 down with Cilic serving in the second, and then we can basically just skip right to, the tornado final. Aside from RG19, I've never seen a big pro match be this significantly affected by wind since. It was a very ugly final, and again, like his coach before him, Andy Murray would take the scenic route. And again, Murray found the resolve, kind of like, that last game at Wimbledon. This was more so over a match. Djokovic came storming back after going down 2 sets to love. Going into the 5th, it was like, oh god, is this guy about to get dealt, the most brutal blow yet? But of course, again, he was able to pump the brakes on the Djokovic comeback and completed what had to be just the most fulfilling journey to becoming a major champion. And at the top, my favorite Andy Murray moment of all time. I knew I was watching history when I saw it unfold live, and that is Andy Murray's chase down of the world number 1 position in 2016. Listen, I'm sure if you asked Andy if he could have a couple more years at the top without the debilitating injury in exchange for never reaching number 1, he would take it in a heartbeat. But if it had to happen, this was a hell of a last burst from him. Many years from now, those who, did not see him play are just going to see the 3 majors, ask themselves, was he really all that? I mean, Stan Wawrinka has 3 majors. This is why that conversation was a thing. Obviously, despite Murray having the superior career clearly, but even to casuals, this run, this moment right here, unquestionably, history will look back, and this is what will separate Andy Murray from the pack. Andy Murray reached world number 1 in a time where the last non-Big 3 world number 1 was Andy Roddick. And then once Federer took over following January of 2004, that ranking was passed around 3 different guys and was not relinquished until the early 2020s. Of course, the one exception being one Andy Murray. And he would do so in a season where Novak Djokovic, by early June, had approached the highest point total in the history of the rankings, nearly 17,000 points, and just over 8,000 points clear of number 2 Murray after defeating him to win Roland Garros and hold all 4 majors. Another year-end number one finish seemed all but locked up for Novak again by early June. At that time, Novak on top of the world. Obviously, health, motivation issues would begin to seep in. He would shockingly go out early at Wimbledon a couple weeks later, and the door was left ever so slightly ajar, especially as Andy Murray would sort of cruise to his second Wimbledon title. Yes, Djokovic was slowly entering freefall, but also he was falling from, again, the highest point total in ATP rankings history. And in 2016, it's not like he would do nothing the rest of the year. He would still win Toronto, make the finals of the US Open. Andy Murray, meanwhile, would pick up his second singles gold medal in Rio, a record that he holds on his own, the only man to hold multiple gold medals in singles. And then it seemed like he had squandered his opportunity for this chase in New York when he suffered an upset at the hands of Kei Nishikori in the quarters of the Open. But then so began the autumn of Andy. I think given the context, given the unblemished record, this is the single greatest post-US Open stretch, at least that I've ever seen. Actually slipped in between there was one of the great matches in Davis Cup history with Murray and Del Potro, a match that finished well over the 5-hour mark, and that becomes important when you think about the mileage that Andy Murray was racking up in this stage. But following this, he would sweep in Asia at Beijing and Shanghai without dropping a set at either. I think knowing the opportunity at hand and what was on the line, he really went all in this chase, played Vienna as well. Another 500 points picked up there. And then when he came to Bercy, really the first time this streak was on the ropes, Verdasco again had him in a really tight one, got out of there 7-5 in the third. And then in the quarters, as Djokovic fell and Murray would be given a retirement win in the semis, for the first time, Andy Murray would assume the world number one position. Of course, for good measure, would go on to take out that title as well in a tight final against John Isner. He went to London in the group against Nishikori, rallied from a set down, I believe. At that point, that was the longest 3-set match at the ATP Finals in history. A record that would, of course, be short-lived, as it was immediately topped in the semifinals when Murray took on Raonic. Rematch of their Wimbledon final, and they played quite a bit throughout the course of this season. And of course, this was as close as Milos would get. Andy Murray would have to claw back from a set and a breakdown against one of the game's all-time great servers. This match was, on crack. There were so many twists and turns. Every time you thought somebody had the upper hand, another wrench would be thrown in the script. Murray would have to dig out 2 tiebreakers from a set down. In the final set one, he would have to also save a match point. And yeah, this is really where that streak and the potential of Murray finishing world number one here was put to the test. Again, at a knife's edge of not even getting the chance to compete to finish the year number one, and having all that hard work he'd done be for naught. But Murray just scraped through and got a chance at a shootout match with Novak Djokovic, winner takes all for the world number one. And think about that. All this work that Murray had done, really going back to clay court season, the losses being so few, so far between, and then down the stretch, once he realized, he really had a chance at this thing he might never have again, playing all these extra events, winning every single match available to him, and he needed every last one because it still came down to the last match of the season for if he would be world number one to end 2016 or not. And for all that good hard work he'd done, the tennis gods smiled down upon Andy Murray on that day. Despite probably inevitable fatigue building at that point, Andy Murray stayed solid, locked in, start to finish, and that allowed him to take care of that final in pretty straightforward fashion. And that, to me, right there, is Andy Murray's one shining moment. I think his rise to number one is the most impressive thing he has ever done. At several points just looked like it wasn't meant to be, but he just willed it to happen. And even though the player that ascended to number one would not last for much longer, I think that is a phenomenal last hurrah for Andy Murray as we knew him. And yeah, that does it. That's my list of my 5 favorite Andy Murray moments. Feel free to discuss any additions you may have in the comment section below. I know there are plenty of honorable mentions out there. I really wanted to find a place to squeeze in, the baby Autumn of Andy in 2014 to make the tour finals, where Robredo flipped him the double bird. And those two played a couple of real epics that fall. Alas, wasn't meant to be. But, albeit a belated congratulations to Andy Murray on a spectacular career. Of course, he will continue to keep in touch with us in the tennis world for at least a couple months, weeks longer in the coaching box. But if you made it this far, I hope that you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. I got a boatload more of historical videos in the works planned for this winter, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I will see y'all in the next one.